Hello and welcome to our workshop on spring lawn prep. I'm Mike. This is Ron. Together we'll share important information to help you get ready for spring.
So absolutely, the snow has stopped, the weather is warming up, and it's a great time to start prepping your yard, your lawn for spring. Doing some of those simple steps at the beginning of the season will help your yard become the envy of the neighborhood. Now, as you know, spring springs at different times of the year in different parts of the country. Now, depending on where you are or where you live, your start time will vary from others.
Yep. Now, topics that we'll cover today include raking, removing matted growth from your grass, aerating, a very important process. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Fertilizing, what's in it, how it helps. Seeding, adding to bare spots or making your lawns thicker. Watering, how much is needed, when do you water. Mowing, mowing heights and the frequency that you should be mowing. And planting, that includes grass, of course, but new flowers and shrubs as well.
For more detailed instructions, check out homedepot.com. It has numerous videos and articles on lawn care. They cover yard care for the spring, the summer, the fall, and the winter. We also have a resource guide, links to guides and videos that you can download. So Mike, let's begin by talking a little bit about fertilizer. Fall is the best time to fertilize your yard. Spring is the next best time to fertilize. But what type of fertilizer should we use, Mike?
That's a great question. There are different kinds of fertilizers. You might be thinking fertilizer, but there are some important differences that you need to be aware of. First of all, there's time release. Now, sometimes that's called controlled release. What that does is it provides a steady supply of nutrients to your lawn for many months. This is perfect for those of us who maybe don't want to do it as often as we should. We don't really want to be in the lawn all the time. Or if you just tend to forget, you forget sometimes that you need to fertilize. But the factors controlling the rate and duration of how that type releases its nutrients, those are known as controllable. That situation is kind of set, it's controlled. Now, there's a different kind of a slow release called gradual release. It's also called slow release sometimes. This also releases nutrients slowly over time, but the difference is the rate and the pattern and the duration of the release are not controlled. They're dependent on microbes who are affected by the soil temperature and the moisture conditions. So they're both slow. One of them is more controlled and kind of set. The other depends on all those things I just mentioned. So the release rate is going to vary. Now, burning. Sometimes if you use too much fertilizer, you can burn your lawn. You may have heard that. But what does that mean? It's when clumps of fertilizer are not evenly distributed. We're going to talk a lot today about how important it is to distribute these things evenly. But if you don't, if you do it by hand, you could get clumps of fertilizer in different parts of your yard. That fertilizer, concentrated like that, can burn and damage your lawn's root system. That's going to result in bare or brown spots.
Next is granular. It comes in a time release and a gradual release. Now, this is good for well-established yards that are already thick and lush. However, when you use sod squares, they can fall into the gaps, creating what we call a grid pattern. And this is not necessarily good because that way the yard is actually thicker in the gaps.
And real quick, Ron, if you're not familiar with sod, sod is that it looks like carpet, but it's actual living grass that you can get if you're in a hurry and you don't want to wait to grow grass. You can buy pre-established grass, but it comes in little squares. You put those squares down, but of course there are gaps in between. And like Ron said, you can get the fertilizer and the seed down in those gaps. The grass is going to grow unevenly, and you're going to have kind of a pattern, a square pattern on your yard, which you don't want.
Going to look like a checkerboard.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So next on the list is a liquid. It's water soluble. You can spread it with a hose. It's for quick applications. This is awesome for newer yards that haven't necessarily gone through their full 2-year growing cycle.
Now we've got a couple here. You literally hook your water hose to this and it mixes as you go. So you don't have to worry about any kind of pre-mixing. It's a really easy, effective way to do that.
Lots of different types of brands out there, but it is super easy to apply.
Now, Ron, what about grass seed?
Man, there's lots of different grass seed. It comes in multiple forms, multiple varieties. First, let's talk about the different types of grass seed. You got a fescue out there. You got a Bermuda. you got a Kentucky, you got a rye, you got a Bahia, you got a buffalo, a centipede, and a bentgrass. There are tons and tons of different types out there. But what you need to know is you need to know first, is your yard primarily in the sun or the shade? Next, think about, do you have bare spots? And when we talk about bare spots, know this. Know that dog urine kills grass. It's because of a high concentration of nitrogen in their urine. So when you're addressing those bare spots, the first thing you're going to want to do is clear out that bare spot, Mike. And then you're going to want to use something like the Easy Seed or the Smart Patch product. Perfect for smaller types of patches and gaps, but not widespread issues. The coverage, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be based on what's called out on the label. Usually anywhere from 85 to 100 square feet based on what the container size is. So Mike, let's take a quick look at one of these containers. So this is a Smart Patch from Pennington. This is about 5 pounds, and 5 pounds of this is going to cover 100 square feet. So based on how many different types of bare spots you might have, you got to do the short-term math to determine whether or not this is going to handle what you need. Now, it also comes in a bigger bags as well, but I find that these little containers are really good for multiple small brown spots. There are bare spots throughout your property.
And one thing to keep in mind, you might think if you've not done a lot of lawn work in your yard, you might think grass seed is grass seed. They all have a lot of things in common, but some grass seed is meant to be spread more broadly and affect your lawn on a broad basis. But then things like this, they're just constructed a little bit differently. They're specifically made for bare spots. Now, when spreading over large areas, you can mix the seed with a couple of things: potting soil and topsoil, and add that to the grass seed. The potting soil is going to help bond the grass seeds together and help them absorb moisture. The topsoil is going to help fill in the hole left when you're clearing out the bare spot that you talked about. You can also add sand if you have Bermuda grass, and that's because Bermuda grass loves sand. So that's really going to help that kind of establish itself. We talked about spreading these evenly. How do you do that? It's important to spread fertilizer and grass seed evenly. You can do that with the spreader. I've got one here behind me. Now these come in a couple of different configurations. There are push spreaders on wheels like this one, but we also have handheld spreaders like the one that Ron has. Some of these are battery operated and some are manual. Some of them have kind of a handle and you turn it and it spreads the seed or the fertilizer. And then some of them run on batteries. You just kind of hit a button and it starts doing that. But there's a couple of different features on here. Like I said, you can use these for a couple of different things: grass seed, fertilizer, and even weed control products. All of those need to be spread evenly in your yard. Some of them have an edging feature like this one. You can see there's a little thing on the front that kind of blocks the seed. Why do you want to do that? It helps you to avoid dispensing the seed where you don't want it. Things like driveways and sidewalks. Think about it. If you're doing this in the middle of your yard, you want it to spread out all over the place. But if you happen to get to the end of your yard and you're next to your walkway or your driveway, you don't want to put the seed on the driveway. It's a waste, right? So you can block it and it keeps it only going in a certain direction. Now, fertilizers and grass seed can stain your walkway or your driveway, but they can also obviously grow grass. If you've got cracks in your driveway and you put some seed in there, guess what? You're going to end up with some grass in there, which you don't want.
So some other things that spreaders have. They have adjustments. They have controls on them that allow you to set and determine how much of this is going to be spread. Check the package for most of the products. It will show you what setting that you use based on the spreader that you have and the product that you're using. Some things to avoid. Avoid just using a plastic cup and spreading by hand. Number one, you're not going to apply it evenly. And if you spread the fertilizer like that, again, like Mike said earlier, you could burn your yard. If you do that with grass seed, it's going to clump up and it's going to be wasted. It can also be washed away and be eaten by the birds and wildlife in the area. But it can be used for other things like ice melt as well. If you're in the north and you want to spread that ice melt out on your driveway or out on your sidewalk, you can use one of these to spread it out nice and even.
Now, like Ron said, You can look on the back of the package and you'll see a lot of the packages will show you the type of spreader that you might have and the type of material that you're putting down. Based on those two things, it will tell you where to set this knob. And again, like Ron said, that's going to determine how much it's coming out at a time. Different products need to come out at different rates based on the machine and the product. So that's what that knob's for. And if you don't know, it's like, I don't know where to set it. Again, just look on the back of the package and it will tell you.
Something else to be aware of. If you set the wrong setting and you're dispersing too much, of course you can have problems with your yard and your lawn, but you're also going to waste a lot of the actual seed. That bag that might say is good for 3,000 square feet, based on the setting of say a 6, if you set it higher and you're letting more come out, you're going to lose more of that seed and it's not going to finish the entire property based on your calculations or the square footage of your property.
There are some other items you might want to think about having in and around your house when you're doing yard work. Some of these things are pretty common and you might already have some of these, but if you're new to home ownership, or maybe you've had a home but you didn't really have a lawn, or maybe you didn't have to take care of it, maybe you were in a townhouse or a condo, but there are some things you might want to get. Things like wheelbarrows, gloves, water hoses are important, rakes, different kinds of rakes depending on what you're doing, sprinklers, and lawn bags. All things you might want to think about picking up. Now, when it comes to lawn prep, there are several steps to take early in the spring.
So the first thing you're going to want to do is rake that yard. You're going to want to do this before mowing the first time. Rake the entire yard thoroughly. Remove any matted grass clumps, embedded leaves, and alleviate that thatch. Now, for those of you that don't know what thatch is, thatch consists of a layer of leaves, roots, and dead grass blades that build up between the live grass and soil. It's absolutely a normal component of actively growing grass, but you need to know thatch keeps water, air, and nutrients from reaching the grass. For larger yards, you can buy or rent a dethatching machine that has small metal tines that scrape the thatch out.
Now, if you're thinking about thatch, this is not necessarily something you're going to notice right off the bat. You might, but thatch, like you said, is all this old organic stuff. It could be leaves or grass or twigs, whatever. But over time, they kind of decompose, they get compressed, and they gather at the base of your grass. Because of where it is, you may not even know you have thatch. But if you get a thatch rake, and there is a specific rake made for this, and start going through your grass, you'll probably be surprised how much of that stuff starts to come out. But it's huge, especially in the spring, when the grass is really hungry and thirsty for nutrients and water and getting ready to, start growing for the summer. That thatch, the thicker it is, the more likely it is to block all the things that your grass need, nutrients, even sunlight, water, all of that, even air. So it's important to get that stuff out. If you rake your thatch, again, you want to use the right rake. A rake with flexible tines, like the one that we have over here. This is made for more like general yard work, raking up mowed grass, clearing leaves. But this is not going to work well for thatch. These are made specifically to gradually go over your grass, remove things like leaves, but not really affect the grass itself. These are not strong enough to dig down into the grass, which is what you want to do when you're working on thatch, right? For that, you want a thatch rake. A thatch rake has, like Ron said, they're metal tines, but they're almost like blades. They're really thin pieces of metal and they're really, really super sturdy. So what that means, it's going to be able to get down in between the blades of grass, grab onto that debris that's underneath and pull that out without really affecting your grass itself. So it's really, really important that you get that kind of rake for that.
Yeah, it's absolutely a specific activity-driven rake. It's not just any old rake. So when raking your lawn, avoid using metal garden rakes. These are used for pulling up plants and pulling up roots, removing grass, and clearing garden beds. Not a good idea for general use raking or removing leaves, because you're going to pull up that fresh grass shoots. So when you rake, you also don't want to rake whenever it's wet or muddy. Kind of doing this is going to literally pull the grass out by the roots and you're not going to have any more grass.
I feel like American Gothic standing here with this rake.
That's
To be
right.
honest. But think about it. This is, again, this is a metal rake, kind of like the thatch rake that we talked about, a little bit different, but these are metal and they're very, very sturdy. So if you use this on grass, you're going to damage the grass again. But this is really made for like gardening, or if you're clearing an area and you need to get rid of rocks and sticks and grass and everything. This is going to dig down into the soil and remove that stuff. So that's when you want to use this. But again, there are a ton of different rakes and they're all made for specific reasons. You don't need 15 rakes in your house, but there are specific rakes made to do specific things. And you're going to run into problems if you try to use the wrong one in certain situations. Next up, we want to talk about aerating. Aerating is something that you may not be that familiar with, but it is really, really important. Aerating is great for all lawns, but especially older lawns with heavy thatch or compacted soil. If you're doing a lot of activity in your yard, something you don't really think about, but the soil starts to get really, really impacted and compressed, and that's making it hard for things to grow, especially grass. So when you aerate, what you're actually doing is poking or digging small holes in the soil. The gaps and holes left behind, they're going to allow air and nutrients and water to get down into the soil and reach the roots where they're needed the most. Now, to test the soil's compaction, again, you can't really tell how compacted your soil is, but you can test that to get an idea. First of all, if your grass is just not doing well and you've done a lot and you can't figure out why, that's probably the reason. But you can just take a screwdriver, use a regular screwdriver, and insert that into the soil by hand. If it slides in really easy, that's good. That means your soil is not that compacted. If you get resistance and it's kind of tough to push in, it probably means your soil is compacted. And when you do that, make sure that it hasn't rained, because even if your soil is compacted, if it's wet, it's obviously going to make it a little bit easier for that screwdriver to go in. So let it be nice and dry and then test it out. But how often should you aerate? In high traffic areas, or if you have heavy clay soil, you want to aerate every year, at least once a year. You can do it more often, but at least once a year. If you have sandy soil, or if your lawn is growing really well and you don't really have any issues, you can aerate every 2 or 3 years. You can put it off a little bit longer.
All right, so the next question we're going to ask ourselves is, when do we aerate? Well, if you've got cool season grass, i.e. in the north, you're going to aerate your lawn in the spring. Warm season grass in the south, you're going to aerate in the late spring, early summer. You want to do this before there's a great deal of heat. Now, you can hire a lawn service to aerate, right? You can also rent an aerating tool from our rental center, but you can also wear shoe aerator spikes that use small manual aerators to actually get in the ground as you're walking, or you can get a small manual aerator for smaller yards. You can
see here.
Yeah, you can actually see here, it has little pokey ends to it, the holes in it.
See the little holes there.
It actually is going to do exactly what the aerating tool is meant to do, which is pull those plugs out of the grass, allowing you to have the more nutrients and air get down into the root system.
And this is pretty simple to use. You can see there's kind of a footstep here. You just hold on to these and just kind of push it into the ground. It's going to pull up little plugs of soil. Now, obviously, if you've got a giant 3 or 4 acre yard, you're probably not going to want to go the manual route. That's going to take a lot of work. But those are really nice if you've got, a small townhouse with a small patch of lawn in the front. That's where that makes more sense.
Now, if you do have that big yard you were talking about, you can also use a lawn tractor. You can get an aerating system that sets on the back of the actual tractor, and then you can weigh that system down with like cinder blocks or something like that. Now, here's a tip. If you're going to aerate or have aeration done, you always want to watch out for sprinkler heads and tree roots. What I like to do every year is I go around and I mark my sprinkler heads with like yard marking flags, so I know exactly where they're at, and that way I can avoid them, because we definitely don't want to hit them.
Yeah. And you'll also notice if you start looking for aerators, some of them have little almost like tines that go into the ground. Some of them have, like we just showed you, with a little hollow kind of chamber that digs out and pulls up a plug. Either is good because they're all poking holes, but the bigger the hole, the more you're going to get stuff to the roots. So if you've got really compacted soil, or if your grass is struggling, you might want to go the route where you get the larger plugs out, because it's just going to allow more of the stuff that your grass needs to get down to the roots. Now, once you've aerated, you can't leave those soil plugs just to dry out. You'll notice after you do the aerating, especially if you have a large yard and you're using one of those tractor pulled kind of devices, those little pieces of like round dirt, they're going to be lying all over your yard. And you might think, do I pick those up? Do I leave them there? It's perfectly fine to leave them there, and you should, because first of all, they're going to disappear after it rains. That dirt will fall apart. But you're just adding soil, and any kind of soil matter and material that's in the soil, you're adding that to your lawn if you leave it there. The only thing that you don't want to do is aerate during a drought. So if you're having an extended dry period, it's probably best to wait. Now, what about fertilizer? Obviously, we've talked about seeding a bit. Fertilizing is really important as well. You want to apply spring fertilizer this time of year, about 3 weeks after the grass has started greening, or after the first 2 or 3 mowings. So you've got some leeway there. If you do it too early, you risk feeding the weeds in addition to the grass, or the fertilizer just running off. Grass could still be somewhat dormant since you're coming out of the winter, and it won't really bind to the fertilizer if you do it too soon.
So how do we fertilize? Well, first, you're going to want to water a few days before applying your fertilizer. You're going to do this to avoid burning the roots, and you're also going to have some weed prevention as well. You can also use the fertilizer in the early spring. The best times to fertilize, right? First, you want to choose the right one for the region in which you live. There are northern and there are southern blends. You're going to apply this in the early spring, sometime between February and April, depending on your region. This is going to strengthen the root system of your yard. Again, you're going to do it again if you have a weaker yard, right? Again, in the late spring, about 6 to 8 weeks later. This is going to help keep the grass well nourished. It's an option, but it's an awesome idea. And then again, you're going to fertilize in the summer, 6 to 8 weeks later. What this fertilizer is going to do is it's going to protect and strengthen after those summer activities, those barbecues, those playing in the yard, and that wear and tear that accumulates during the course of the summer. And then again, you're going to do it in the fall. Fall fertilization prepares the yard for winter.
So the key there, at least 3 times a year, spring, summer, and fall. But depending on your situation, you might want to do it late spring just to give it that extra boost. But at least 3 times a year.
And it also depends on, like we said before, how established your yard is. So that's very, very important. If it's established and it's lush and it's thick and it's healthy, you don't necessarily have to do it so much.
Right. Now, another important thing to think about is really knowing your lawn size before fertilizing, so you can purchase and apply the correct amount. Another tip, it's okay to seed your lawn in between when you fertilize, unless your fertilizer has a weed killer in it, and some do, usually called weed and feed. You'll see that in a lot of the options that we have in the store. They feed your lawn and they also kill weeds. However, you never want to seed after you use a weed and feed product. That will damage your new grass seeds. And after using any weed killer, you want to wait about 6 to 8 weeks to seed. Just read the package for specifics. It'll kind of walk you through that. But just know that's one thing you need to be aware of.
One of the things I like to do is I like to set up those feedings and the seedings in my Outlook calendar, believe it or not, on my smartphone. So it tells me exactly when to do it. I never forget. It's a reoccurring event. Yep. Just a little tip that I actually do. Now, when you think about fertilizer, let's think about the nutrients that are in it. So when you look at that bag, you're going to see 3 numbers, usually on the front of the bag. And this is going to indicate the percentage of those 3 key nutrients. They include nitrogen. This is good for the color and the growth of the grass. Phosphorus. This is going to help flowers and root growth and early establishment of plants. And then finally, potassium. This is going to help root development and growth and the movement of the water and the nutrients and the carbs in the plant tissue itself. But then you've got grass and flowers and all the vegetables and all the different levels of the need when it comes to these nutrients. It's always best to get a soil test kit. This is going to tell you the percentage of the nutrients needed in your soil. You're going to use these results to determine what your yard needs in the terms of those three key ingredients that we mentioned before. Now, you can also have a test done, right, with the help from the county extension agent offices.
So just to make sure that you're clear on how those two things are connected. A, the packages, you can look on any package, and you've probably noticed this, and maybe you didn't really know what they meant. Usually in the bottom right-hand corner, they can be anywhere on the bag. They're just generally in the bottom right-hand corner. There's three numbers, and they represent those three nutrients that we talked about. Now, what does that mean when you get a soil test? If you get a soil test and your lawn happens to be high in potassium, you don't want a fertilizer that's high in potassium. That's not an issue for you. But if it's low in potassium, you do need more potassium. So especially if you go with one of those agent services like your county extension agent, they can kind of walk you through how to apply the results of your soil test to the packages and to the products. But also, I think on a lot of the soil tests that you can buy, it'll kind of walk you through what to do with the results. But just know that's how those things work together. You determine what your yard needs, and then you purchase a product that's going to supply what your lawn needs. So when you think about it like that, it kind of makes sense, right? Now, what about grass types? There are different types. Like Ron mentioned earlier, there are cool season grasses, things like Kentucky bluegrass, ryegrass, tall fescue. Those are going to grow vigorously in cooler temperatures in the late summer and early fall. And there's also warm season grasses that you mostly find in the south, right? Bermuda, Bahia, zoysia, centipede. Those are all going to thrive in warmer temperatures in the south. You'll want to pick the type of grass seed that suits your climate and your yard's sun exposure, or what you already have. If you happen to know that you have a certain kind of grass, especially if you're adding to it, you want to obviously get the same grass seed. But also consider how much moisture your lawn will get, either from rainfall or from irrigation. Now, if you live in a dry area, look for a type of grass that resists drought, right? That makes sense. Some grasses take less water than others. If you don't have a lot of water, you're going to want to go that route. Finally, pick a type of grass seed that can stand up to the amount of foot traffic in your lawn. If you rarely use your lawn, that's not as much of a concern. But if you've got a big family, or you entertain a lot, or you've got kids and animals that are always in the yard, that's a lot of foot traffic. You want to take that into consideration. Just know this, Home Depot stores stock the grass seeds and other products that are appropriate for your area and climate. So you don't have to worry about that too much. There are grass seeds that are made for the South. You're not going to find those in a store in Maine. Nobody needs them up there. Same thing, if you have cool season grasses up there in the north, you're not going to necessarily see those in the south because it doesn't make sense. So you don't have to worry too much about that. What you find in the store is generally appropriate for your area. You might need to look for some specifics based on your conditions, but just know you don't have to worry too much about that. Most warm season grass seed should be planted in the spring after your last frost. Some can be planted into the summer months. Still, they should be planted at least 90 days before the final frost in your area, or the seed may not survive the winter.
So that's a good point about Home Depot stocking regional products. Kind of takes some of the guesswork out of it for us, for you. So that's an awesome thing.
Real quick, the only difference is if you live in the middle of the country, that's like a transitional zone, you might have both. They might have a mixture of both because both might work to some degree in your area. So it's not a standard like hard line down the middle of the country. There are some areas that kind of deal with both. But for the most part, most people will find one or the other in their store.
Now, take a look at the graph that we're showing on the screen, the warm and cool climates. This can help you determine, the type of grass that you might have or the type of grass that you might want. Cool season grasses should be fertilized right around St. Patrick's Day and aerated in the early spring. They'll need about 1 to 2 pounds of fertilizer per square foot per year. Warm season grasses, on the other hand, can be fertilized around Easter with a high nitrogen, slow release lawn food and aerated in the late spring. Now, they will need 3 to 4 pounds of fertilizer per square foot per year. Now, think about this when choosing that grass type. Bermuda grass fills in quickly and is aggressive in its growth pattern. It helps in resisting weeds. It flourishes in the full sunlight in the warmer regions in the southeast. Drought resistance is high, but its need for water is around the medium level.
Bahia grass Now, this is found on lawns throughout Florida, but from Florida throughout the southern coastal plains and the Texas Gulf Coast, where resilience in turf grass is needed. Its drought resistance is very high and its need for water is low. That's why it makes sense in those areas.
And then there's buffalo grass. This is a low maintenance, tough turf grass that's found in the Great Plains from Montana to Mexico. The drought resistance is high and the need for water is low.
There's centipede grass. This is a popular choice throughout the southern U.S. for its slow growing and low maintenance traits, even in poor soil. Drought resistance is medium and its need for water is also medium.
Then there's creeping bent grass. It provides a soft, dense, carpet-like lawn, commonly found on golf courses and putting greens, but it requires significant maintenance. The drought resistance is low and the need for water is high.
So it makes sense on a golf course because there's people there all the time taking care of it. May not be a good choice for your lawn. Now, what about fescue? Fescue has many varieties and textures that can thrive in mild winters and warm summers. Its drought resistance is high. Its need for water is low. So that's a really good choice if you've got conditions that need a more hardy kind of a grass.
And then there's Kentucky bluegrass. This is a lush, dense, and durable lawn grass. It's a self-spreading variety. It withstands cold and resistance to disease. Drought resistance is medium. Need for water is high to medium.
Ryegrass is intolerant of extreme heat or cold. It's commonly used for overseeding a warm season lawn. Its drought resistance is low and its need for water is high.
And then there's St. Augustine grass. It grows quickly and tolerates heat and humidity of the south. It also isn't bothered by much salt, making it a good choice for coastal living. Drought resistance is low to medium. The need for water is medium to high.
And zoysia grass, it spreads by stolons and rhizomes to create a dense lawn that can handle heavy foot traffic in warmer regions. Its drought resistance is medium to high, and its need for water is medium.
So before we get on to weed prevention, Mike, let's talk really quick about zoysia. Now, I had to put that actual grass in my yard because I currently have Bermuda grass, but I have a side of my property that wasn't getting enough sun to help Bermuda grass thrive. The one thing I found out about zoysia is it is very shade tolerant. So it's a good choice if you've got a part of your property that's getting an awful lot of shade.
And that's a common thing, you know, if you determine that you either have a grass, a certain type of grass, or you're looking to add grass, or again, maybe you're doing this for the first time, just know that you don't have to stick with just one. A lot of these, as you just heard, have a lot of similarities, but like Ron said, some are more appropriate for sun, full sun. Some are more appropriate for shade. You might consistently have both of those situations in your yard. So that way you may want to mix your grass, right? Because one isn't going to necessarily work all over your yard. So it's something to think about.
We definitely covered that earlier when we said the first thing that you got to understand is what kind of property you have. Is it in the sun or is it in the shade?
Right.
So getting back to weed prevention, there are what we call pre-emergence and post-emergent herbicides that are available. Pre-emergent herbicides address weeds before they begin emerging from your yard. Pre-emergent herbicides are a chemical barrier on the soil that prevent weed seedlings from sprouting. But also know this can also work against new grass seeds as well. This is why you never seed and weed at the same time. Then there's post-emergent herbicides. They are used once the weeds have sprouted.
If you use pre-emergent before the weeds come out, it's going to help prevent them altogether. What you can't do, you can do it, but it just won't help. If you already see weeds, it's too late to use pre-emergent because they already emerged. That's when you want to use the post-emergent. So there are emergents or herbicides, I should say, that help before the weeds show up, and there are some that help after they show up. You just want to make sure you use them at the right time. What about seeding the lawn? We have resource options for directions on when to seed. Also, you can check homedepot.com. You can go to some of our vendor partners, Pennington, Scott's. They all have a lot of really good information on their websites. All of those are great options and resources. But there are many types of grass seeds. Some are better for drought. Some are better for high foot traffic, like we talked about in general with grass. But there are even grass types for shade, like we just mentioned. You just have to really think through that. You can buy a single type of seed, or you can blend them, like we said, depending on your yard conditions. Just remember, always spread grass seed with a spreader. to ensure you spread it evenly. It's really, really important.
So let's just talk briefly about overseeding, right? That's adding new grass seed to an established lawn without turning the soil. You want to make sure that you add some type of seed to your existing yard, right, to keep it nice and lush.
And the same type. Make sure again that
That's
it's the
right.
same type.
You're going to do this as a maintenance type option. You're just improving the grass that you already have. Seeding. This is more of a one-off or complete lawn project. You're going to use this when starting your yard or replacing your yard. Follow the instructions on the packaging for the spreading and the watering of the seed. Then you have those seeding low spots. If you've just got a few spots with problems, you can use the patch and repair kits that we talked about earlier. And the way these work is the seeds have fertilizer and a growing material to absorb water and stick to the area. To use, you're going to rake the area to loosen the soil. You're going to apply the seed so that the area is mostly covered, but you can still see the ground. You're going to water the area until it's completely saturated and no more water can be absorbed. You're going to keep it well watered, but you want to keep your pets and your kids off those new seedlings. Now, Mike, another key point here is sometimes you might want to cover that up. Like in some parts of the country, I've seen people like sprinkle hay over top the new seedlings. It's going to keep like wildlife from coming and eating the seeds. It keeps it protected.
And it's almost like a mulch. It's going to help keep moisture in there as well. Next up, we want to focus on watering. Watering is one of the most important things that you have to do when it comes to a lawn. Spring irrigation varies by region. In general, grass needs 1 to 1.5 inches of water per week, whether that comes from rain or a spring lawn care routine. Now, you can use a garden hose and a sprinkler or an irrigation system if you've got that or are thinking about putting one in. But to avoid evaporation in the heated air during late spring and summer, it's best to water early before 10 a.m. You want to avoid watering in the hottest part of the day, midday, or in the evening and late at night. If you water too little and your lawn becomes dry and patchy, that's not good. But if you water too much and your lawn, it's going to get susceptible to rot and disease because it's just too wet and it's too moist. It's always best to water for longer periods of time. One of the mistakes that people make is they water often, but they don't water for long periods of time. What does that mean? The water never has a chance to really soak down into the soil to the roots where it's needed. The water is going to mostly be at the top. Well, what's that going to mean? The roots don't have an incentive to dig down into the soil to go after the water. You want deep, healthy roots. So if you water for long periods of time, the water is going to soak into the soil. Your lawn is going to be healthier. It's going to be more drought resistant. It's just going to be more robust. So think about that. It's best to water, maybe not as often as you might think, but water for a long period of time when you do water.
Now, a way to test whether or not your lawn needs watering is to step on it. Step on and off your grass and just see how fast the blades bounce back. If they're slow to bounce back or they're wilted or curled or dull in color, it's probably time to water. Now, mowing the yard. Wow, mowing the yard. So much to talk about and unpack here. Before mowing for that first time of the season, you got to run that mower through that maintenance check. You want to make sure it's all in great working order. You're going to want to sharpen the blade, check those spark plugs, replace if necessary, check that oil and or the filters, clean the undercarriage out. Now, personally, I'm going to clean my undercarriage out and before I put it away for the winter time after my last mow, right? You want to make sure that there's fresh gas in it. If you didn't drain the old gas out and you were storing it for the winter, you got to get all that old gas out of it. So you want to empty that gas tank at that end of the summer, like I said before, or use a fuel stabilizer product as well.
A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people just don't know that fuel goes bad over time. And when it goes bad, it gets kind of gummy and gooey and it can really clog up your system in your mower. So it's really important at the end of the summer. I know we're focusing on spring and hopefully you already did this, but in the fall, just for future reference, either empty out the fuel or just burn it off. Wait till you don't have much fuel in and just run the lawnmower till it's all gone. If you have to leave it in for some reason, there are fuel stabilizers that you can put in to kind of keep it from breaking down so soon. Really, really important to do that. And, we talked about sharpening the blade. If you're wondering, how does that happen? First of all, you can have that done. There are shops that will do that for you. But we sell all kinds of simple little tools. It's just a little balancing mechanism that you put the blade on, because when you sharpen it, you want to make sure that you're sharpening it to the same degree on both sides of the blade. And as you sharpen it, you can just sit it on there to see if maybe you need to remove more on one side or the other. But there's a little wheel in there. You just kind of literally, like you would sharpen a knife, you kind of sharpen that. But know this, some people wonder how sharp, how sharp is it going to be? Super sharp? Am I going to cut myself? Even if you go into a store and look at a brand new lawnmower and you look at the blade, it's not super sharp. It's sharp in terms of cutting the grass, but it's not like a knife sharp. So you don't have to sharpen it to that degree. You just want it to be relatively sharp to make sure that it's doing what it needs to do when you cut your grass.
So you want to start mowing when the ground is dry enough and the grass is long enough to require cutting. Consider mowing early in the morning when the temperatures are usually cooler and any fog or dew has burned off or dried out. Do not mow when it's raining or it's just rained. Mower will not cut the yard evenly because the blades are slippery and you could slip under the mower, and you definitely don't want that.
Right. So just think about it. I mean, you probably don't want to be there out there anyway after it's rained. You want it to dry up a bit, but the wetter the grass is, the more likely the blade, when it hits the grass, is going to kind of slide off of it, and it will end up tearing it and ripping it and shortening it, but it's not technically cutting it, and that's not good for your grass. The cleaner the cut, the better, and the healthier your grass is going to be. So that's another reason you don't want to mow, but like Ron said, you never want to slip, and you're likely to do that if the grass is wet. Now, also, if you mow wet grass, the mower may become clogged. Think about it, with clumps of wet grass. You also want to mow high. Set the mower wheels to allow for the grass to grow to the height appropriate for the species that you have. And you can just look that up online to kind of figure out how high it should be. But taller grass tends to shade the soil and helps control weeds. But you should mow often. Try to keep no more than a third, try to keep from needing to mow more than a third of your grass height at a time. Otherwise, it can stress the grass, especially in dry seasons. So if your grass is really overgrown, don't think that you need to go out and get caught up right away. Don't try to get it down to the proper height immediately. So again, a third of the grass. So if you let it grow for a really long time and it's this tall, you don't want to cut it down to the normal height that it would normally be. You want to take a third of whatever it is. So you would cut some off. Wait several days, let the grass adjust to that, and then cut it again. You just don't want to come in and kind of try to get caught up all at once. That is not good for your grass. Again, keep a sharp blade. Dull mower blades tear the grass, they don't cut it, and this can lead to brown tips on the grass, and that can invite disease.
All right, so nothing says spring more than flowers. Let's talk a little bit about spring planting. Many of the earliest flowers, like daffodils, tulips, or crocus, come from bulbs planted in the fall. So remember, they're planted in the fall. If you didn't plant those in the fall, there are some great flowers that you can plant in the spring. Azaleas, snapdragons, petunias, phlox, periwinkles, and pansies.
So for evergreen trees and shrubs, fall and spring planting is optimal when the temps and the conditions tend to be a little bit milder. Now, if it's a deciduous tree, meaning it loses its leaves in the fall, stick to fall for planting those.
It offers a gentler entry for those new transplants.
Next up, we want to talk about mulching. Why should you mulch? First and foremost, it helps your yard look neater and more defined. It really impacts your curb appeal. If you've ever seen a house that the homeowner one day decided to replace their mulch and it just looks totally different. Old mulch does what it needs to do, but it doesn't look great. It starts to fade, it looks a little old, but you'll really notice if suddenly somebody has remulched their yard, it makes a huge difference. It's just such a nice statement for the curb appeal of your home. But mulch also helps keep your soil moist. It suppresses weeds. It keeps the soil cooler, which is nice, especially in the summer, and it prevents frost heaving in the winter. If you've never heard of that, frost heaving is when there is an upward swelling of soil during freezing conditions. It's caused by ice in the soil that grows towards the surface, and it just kind of makes a mound of dirt. But again, mulch, even in the winter, can help prevent that. Next up, how much mulch do you need? It depends on the size of the area, obviously, that you're trying to cover, but a good rule of thumb is 2 to 3 inches of mulch. That's really going to smother the weeds. It's going to lock in that moisture. It's going to do all the things that we just mentioned, But if you have your mulch too thin, it's less likely to successfully do some of those things.
And Mike, at the end of the day, this is the biggest mistake that people make when adding mulch is they just don't apply enough. Using less than 2 inches lets in too much light and allows weed seeds to grow. Organic mulch will always decompose, right? But add nutrients to your soil. So that's a good thing. They also tend to fade over time, so they need to be replaced a couple times throughout the year. Now, most mulch is organic. It's like a tree bark or pine needles. But you can also get synthetic mulch as well. They don't break down as fast as organic, but they also don't provide any extra nutrients either. But this type does eventually decompose, but it can be detrimental to the soil. So you want to change that as soon as you think it's time. In the spring, mulch can really help suppress those weeds, Mike.
So again, if you've got organic mulch, that's something that used to be alive. Like Ron said, it could be pine needles, it could be tree bark. The unorganic types, like rubber mulch, there are mulches that are made of recycled tires. Those don't decompose as fast. They will eventually, but you don't want those decomposing because they're not going to add anything to the soil. And if they do, it's maybe something you don't want. So when those start to look bad, you want to just replace those, right? There's no advantage to leaving those for a long period of time. Now, we have talked about a lot today, right? We've covered spring lawn prep and introduced you to basic information regarding things like raking, removing that thatch that we talked about, aerating, which is critical to the healthy lawn, fertilizing, what's in it, how it helps, seeding, adding grass seed to bare spots and lawns, watering, which is critical. How much do you need? When do you do it? Mowing, the best heights, the frequency of mowing, planting new flowers and shrubs.
So we're glad you joined us today. We hope this was beneficial. For everyone here at Workshops Live, thank you for joining us today. And thank you for shopping the Home Depot.